Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, welcome to the Dubai FinTech Summit. It's great to see you all here and great to have you participating in this next conversation. Brad Garlinghouse is the CEO of Ripple. Brad, welcome to the house. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here. Nice to see you again.
So let's kick off with something rather exciting. You have a pretty major announcement to make for us today.
Well, so a couple of things, if you zoom out, Dubai and certainly the Middle East has been a major market for Ripple for years. We've had an office here, and we are now expanding our office here, more office space. We've been doing a lot of hiring here. And we're also announcing that our annual conference, something we call Swell, which brings together about 1,000 people, customers, analysts, et cetera, we're actually hosting it here in Dubai in November. So I think reflective of the environment here in the Middle East and certainly here in Dubai specifically, and we are voting with our feet.
Voting with your feet. Okay, I think that deserves a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. A brand new office coming to the DIFC. So thank you for the vote of confidence in the UAE and in DIFC. Look, Brad, I think Ripple really needs no introduction. Ripple has been one of the most innovative companies when it comes to cross-border payments, a real disruptor in the space. So what is working to build utility and what's not working, particularly here in the UAE?
So I think one of the challenges I think exists for all of crypto is what are the real use cases where you're seeing utility. And we're in the middle of what arguably is one of the more aggressive kind of in the crypto speak, crypto winters. And I think it brings to the fore the need to focus on what problems are we solving. Like if it's just an industry built on speculation, that's not sustainable. And I think what we are seeing at Ripple is our focus from the earliest days on solving a real problem for real customers. And instead of a technology in search of a problem, we started with what is the problem around cross-border payments. And historically, cross-border payments have been slow, they've been expensive, they've been error-prone. And what we're seeing here in the Middle East, and particularly in the UAE, if you go back 10, 20 years, the major financial capitals of the world tended to be, people would say London and New York and maybe Hong Kong, Singapore. And I think Dubai now is in that conversation because I think Dubai is being progressive about where the world's going in 10 or 20 years. And I certainly believe, and I think many people probably in this audience agree, that blockchain technologies really are the underpinning of a next generation of financial services. And seeing the UAE and seeing Dubai lean into that, I think is going to serve this region and certainly this local region very well.
Okay then, so what's your message to the SEC chair as you sit here in the UAE and in Dubai announcing an expansion of your business to this region, given the state of regulation in the United States right now?
Who? No, I'm kidding. All right, so look, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. I find it as a company that started in the United States and as someone who's a US citizen, it's sad. Like I have sadness about this. The U.S. is getting past not just a little bit, but by a lot. And but the tough thing about this is you have a country that I think has put politics ahead of policy. And that's not a good decision if you're trying to invest in the economy. You're seeing, certainly here in the UAE with VARA, the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, certainly what's happened recently in Europe with MiCA. The United States is definitely stuck, and Ripple, the case with the SEC, we will spend, the first time I've shared this publicly, by the time it's said and done, we will have spent $200 million defending ourselves against a lawsuit, which from its very beginning, people were like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. You have video footage of the chair of the SEC as a professor at MIT saying, 75% of these digital assets are commodities, and now he says they're all securities because he's the head of the SEC and he's seeking power and he's putting power ahead of sound policy to grow an economy in the United States. Blockchain technologies are being invested in and pursued in the entrepreneurship outside the United States, and one of the first pieces of advice I give entrepreneurs when they come and ask me, getting something started, I'll say, if I were you, I would not start in the United States. And I think there's a lot of US-based companies and even US public companies that would agree with that.
So what would it take in the United States to provide you with some clear rules of the road and a regulatory framework that works?
Well, I love that question because I think it starts with a clear understanding that I think the vast majority of people working in crypto and blockchain, they are good actors who want to stay within the rules of the road. But we need to know what the rules of the road are. And I think what you have seen, as I mentioned earlier, what you've seen here locally at the UAE level and certainly in Dubai is a clear understanding of here are the rules of the road. This is how these technologies might be unique and different. Here are the rules. And so now entrepreneurs and capital can invest to build those solutions. And again, focusing on real utility, focusing on solving problems, taking friction out of financial transactions and building a more inclusive financial environment is going to be a part of a blockchain-based financial system. But those rules of the road are critical. So I think, we mentioned earlier the VARA here locally, and you're now seeing Hong Kong lean in. Singapore has been a leader historically, for sure. And I think you're going to continue to see employment, capital flow there, companies hiring there, entrepreneurs building new companies there. Just here at the Dubai FinTech Festival, I've talked to several entrepreneurs building and hiring here locally because those rules of the road are clear and they're published. I think it's critical.
Let's talk about the SEC case. I know this is on everyone's minds. You have just revealed to us that you spent $200 million fighting that case. So what's the latest and how close are we to a resolution? Because the obvious issue here is that the SEC alleges that XRP should be classified as a security, but you argue otherwise.
Look, I'll start with the second part of that question. Digital assets, I think, can be regulated differently, but again, we need clarity. So for a government regulator, and even now, the chair of the SEC won't say what ETH is. Well, the SEC previously had said ETH's not a security, well, it had been a security, that it transitioned to not being a security because it's decentralized, which really isn't part of the law, but now they won't say the same thing. I'll start with, we just need clarity. With clarity comes, the ability to move forward. So the case with Ripple was really a very nuanced legal question about is our sales, Ripple's sales of XRP, sales of an unregistered security? The SEC would say yes. Our argument, of course, is it's being purchased by customers doing cross-border payments. It's a currency. Other parts of the US government have called it a currency, and so how could we have known that the SEC might later on view it as a security? Now, the status of the case, we're 2.5 years in. It certainly has created headwinds in the US market, and we expect a decision sometime the next 3 to 6 months. It's at a district court in the United States, and the judge will make the decision when the judge wants to make a decision. We can't know for sure when that'll happen. But again, I will highlight, Ripple has grown remarkably in 2021 and 2022, despite the fact that we're not signing, for all intents and purposes, we're not signing any customers in the United States. 95% of our customers are non-US. I think I mentioned earlier, 20% are here regionally. And it's because it goes back to solving that real problem. You have a lot of remittances leaving the Middle East, going back to countries like India, and it's reducing those costs. It's making it more efficient for banks like RAK Bank or Saab or Qatar National Bank. Like, these are major banks leaning into these new technologies because they see the benefits of those technologies.
So we'll move on from the SEC case, but with regards to the business that you want to do in the region now, let's talk about what the growth profile and the trajectory looks like. How deep do you want to expand and integrate into this part of the world?
Look, as I said earlier, I really do think that if we look out 10 or 20 years, Dubai will be viewed as one of the financial capitals of the globe. And when I say that, I think, okay, well, we want to reflect that in our growth as a company. When 95% of your customers are non-US, well, you want to hire more of your people non-US. Last year, in the face of a lot of layoffs in the crypto industry, Ripple hired 350 people. This year we won't hire as many, but they'll be largely non-US. So certainly, the majority of our hiring in 2023 will be outside the United States, and primarily in London, Singapore, and Dubai, because that's where the customer growth is, because that's where the activity is, and frankly, because that's where the rules of the road are clear. We want to go where we're wanted, where governments are leaning into and rewarding and inviting that kind of friendly hey, we want to collaborate with you. And I certainly have seen that here in Dubai for years, and that's why we started setting up an office here years ago.
So how do you envision Ripple's technology and XRP to impact the global financial system over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, so first of all, I'll answer that. I'll start by saying I think a lot of different parts of crypto are going to impact the financial system, not just what Ripple is doing, not just what XRP is doing. And just one other comment about the SEC lawsuit on that point. We said at the beginning, 2.5 years ago, that this wasn't just a lawsuit about Ripple and XRP. It was a lawsuit about how the US SEC was really going after the whole industry. And we have seen that now play out with lawsuits or threatened lawsuits against Coinbase, Paxos. There's a whole bunch of players that are obviously facing that. But I think if you go up level to address your question, the financial system has lots of intermediaries and it has lots of central counterparties. And blockchain-based technologies can reduce that friction. They can remove the central counterparty. If you're doing that, there's a couple benefits. Speed of transactions can go up, and the cost of transactions can go up. Now, it happens to be that the segment that Ripple is particularly focused on, cross-border payments, has been historically dominated by SWIFT, which also has a very high error rate. Because if I'm sending a wire transfer, and instead of Dan Murphy, I spell it with one letter wrong, and I'm sending that, it's going to get bounced back. If it's going through multiple correspondent banks along the way, that's going to take a lot of time. And I mean, literally, you'll hear horror stories of a wire transfer going missing. Rarely do they go missing forever. That's very, very rare. However, you could have an error, or 6% of all wire transfers are ending up bounced back. Imagine if 6% of every Google search just came back with a 404 error. We would not be using Google the way we do today. But it's a reflection of SWIFT was built 50 years ago. And it's a one-way messaging protocol. We can do the same thing with newer, really internet-based technologies. I kind of make the joke that we can stream video from the space station, but we can't move our own money efficiently between currencies and countries. It's just a crazy reality that we live in, and we are changing it bit by bit. Ripple now is doing billions of dollars of transactions, and I said that this region has been clearly progressive and leaning into these technologies and taking advantage of those benefits.
What about in the remittance market specifically, which is ripe for disruption? A number of smaller players now entering into that space and really taking advantage of the cross-border flows that we see here in the UAE and other large remittance markets like Saudi Arabia, for example.
Look, I love this question because the World Bank has published that the average remittance cost is 700 basis points for a population that really can least afford it. Now you think about that, 700 basis points, and the goal, they have set at the World Bank level, a goal by 2030 to reach to 300 basis points. Now on one hand, you would say, well, that's a lot of improvement. On the other hand, 300 basis points, like our goal should be 30 basis points. Like, again, what I struggle with is, this is an audience, this is a community that can least afford these costs, that is being taxed at a much higher rate. If you or I were to go and invest in another company in another country, we're not paying 700 bips to move that money cross-border. And so I find it a negative reflection of where we are, that even our goal is 300 bips. Now, to your point, what is exciting is you see companies building their entire infrastructure on next generation infrastructure that reduces that cost dramatically. There's a company here locally called People, spelled P-Y-P-P-L, that's building their entire next generation remittance on Ripple's technology. They're already doing payouts in, I think, 20 different markets. And it is an opportunity to build at a very low cost, very scalable, and to pass those savings on to customers. And so they're seeing their business grow very well.
So new office in Dubai, what's next?
Well, last year, 2022, as I mentioned, we hired 350 people globally. We opened offices in Dublin and Toronto. As we mentioned earlier, we're expanding our office here and moving offices to more office space. What I think will be next, and certainly something Ripple thinks about, we started with enterprise-based cross-border payments. We talk about there being 4 kind of primitive pieces to blockchain-based technologies: liquidity, compliance, liquidity, compliance, custody, and tokenization. And Ripple really aspires to be more than just that kind of liquidity and cross-border payments. I think you'd expect that we will expand into some of those other areas, either organically or through acquisition. And I think we'll look at, let's make acquisitions in markets that are friendly to these technologies. On the previous panel, you had representation from the UAE, you had representation from Switzerland. These are countries that are providing the clarity for entrepreneurs to invest, and that allows a company like Ripple that is larger. We have more than $1 billion of US dollars cash on our balance sheet. We want to deploy that to grow both organically, internally, but also inorganically through acquisition.
Just on some macro notes as well, I wanted to ask you about what's happening, not just in the US, but globally when it comes to cryptocurrencies. Do you think the issues that we've seen in regional banks have perhaps caused a rethink when it comes to how people are viewing cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether, for example? Obviously, they've rallied through this crisis moment.
It really is interesting to note, because I think people would say in a world where there's fear, why haven't you seen more of a retrenchment of crypto asset values? The overall market is well off its lows. I'll use Bitcoin as a proxy. I think its low was 16 or 17,000. Now it's at roughly 30, maybe it's 28 today. I think it's a reflection of, the previous panel was talking about how important trust, the word trust came up a lot. And I think, when you start to erode that trust in the US banking system, some of that trust has eroded. I don't mind sharing, Ripple, the company, had hundreds of millions of dollars on deposit at Silicon Valley Bank. I had a moment, a very tough Friday, wondering what's going to happen here. And I think it brings up this, if you don't trust the banking infrastructure, and the US arguably is, at least in the top quartile of banks you should be able to trust, yet here we have two top 5 bank failures ever in the United States very recently with SVB and First Republic. If you don't trust your bank, maybe you want to hold assets that you can manage directly. And that's the US. Now, take all of that and apply it to a country like Argentina. In my lifetime, Argentina's peso has been devalued to such a degree that I'm not sure if you had equivalent million USD in Argentinian pesos, do you want to trust that banking system and that government to manage your currency in such a way that you're not going to lose your value? I think I might trust, even with some volatility in crypto, I might trust something different. So I believe what you're seeing in the crypto market is a long-term view that these technologies are here to stay. They solve problems in various ways, and what we're just discussing is around store of value. But you can also use these technologies, as Ripple is, to solve enterprise-based financial services problems, to make things far more efficient. And I think that's going to continue to drive demand also.
Just while we have you, can you tell us the story about SVP? Where were you when you found out that the bank was in trouble, and what did you do?
I was on an airplane, and a friend of mine said to me, "Hey, have you noticed that SVB's stock price is down whatever percent today?" And I was not paying attention, and we did an internal call very quickly, and we like any bank run, you don't want to be part of the problem. We took a kind of, hey, we don't want to be part of the problem. We were in money market funds, so we felt more secure. But it I think highlights how fear can drive, and the acceleration there that happened. There's a concentrated audience, not necessarily the companies, but the venture capital community in Silicon Valley. Definitely, I think, in my opinion, they really caused that run, and because they told all their portfolio companies, hey, you should be afraid. And I don't think the US government handled that particularly well, in my opinion, but I guess hopefully we're getting past that crisis. FRB, First Republic Bank, obviously JP Morgan taking that over, hopefully stems some of the fear, but we shall see.
And just finally, since the collapse of FTX, we've seen this cross-agency regulatory crackdown in the United States. Some within the digital asset community are calling it Operation Choke Point 2.0. How do you see this playing out?
Well, look, I have two reactions. First of all, Dan, I'm glad you asked this. My first reaction is Ripple, and I think many crypto companies are going to go where we are welcome. The US GDP is 22% of global GDP. It's the largest market, but guess what? 78% of the market is not the US. And so, for the time being, and for me, kind of as far as the eye can see, I don't think the U.S. is going to be particularly friendly. I think if Coinbase could go back and do it over, they probably wouldn't have gone public in the United States because that has created some headwinds for them. But I think if you look out, the more we focus on utility, the more we focus on the leadership we're seeing in markets like the UAE and in Europe and in Hong Kong and Singapore, the more I think that will draw attention to the fact that you are not hiring in the United States, and hopefully eventually we'll see the legislature enact new laws to provide the clarity that the market has demanded.
We'll finish on that note. Brad, really appreciate the conversation today. Thanks for speaking with me.
Thanks, Dan.
That's Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple. Thanks, everyone.